John Endicott gazed out the window of his house at the desolate, unfamiliar winter landscape. It still didn't feel like home. He was a pilgrim, one of the first European settlers in North America, and had only arrived 1 year prior in 1628. The first year had gone from bad to worse, culminating in a harsh winter that claimed the life of his wife. Now he was a widower and desperately missed both his life partner and his home country of England. But John had a job to do. He had been appointed the first governor of Massachusetts, in charge of making the Massachusetts Bay Colony welcoming to new arrivals. As he contemplated how to do this, he turned to his own interests. Something that made him feel more at home would likely have the same effect for others. John was an enthusiastic cultivator of fruit and had organized for a certain sapling to be delivered to him, a young European pear. He reasoned that the tree would not only provide food, but would be a comforting reminder of Europe for settlers, and perhaps help his own heart heal as well. With his children watching on, he planted the sapling in front of his house. He is reported to have said, "No doubt, when we have gone, the tree will still be alive." John would never know quite how true his prediction would be. Almost 4 centuries later, the Endicott pear continues to thrive. You're listening to Plant Connection. Life today can feel overwhelming, like we've drifted away from its natural rhythm. This podcast is your space to slow down, breathe, and rediscover the peace and clarity that come from reconnecting with the natural world. I'm your host, Lisa Cutshaw. Let's reconnect, one plant at a time. As the holiday season comes upon us, I was thinking about festive trees, and aside from the obvious Christmas tree, not to mention the holly and the ivy, I recalled the partridge in a pear tree that features in the 12 Days of Christmas Carol. The origins of this song are hazy, but it likely began life in France, probably before the 1700s. In fact, the inclusion of a pear tree might just be a mistake. It's been suggested that when the song was beginning to be known in England, it included the phrase, "a partridge un perdrix," simply renaming the bird in English and then in French. Over time, in perdrix became a pear tree. But despite the mention of the pear tree in the carol potentially being completely unrelated to the tree itself, it's a nice kicking off point to learn more about this fascinating tree and its deep connection with human history and culture. The European pear, also called the common pear, is one of 3 species of cultivated pears and by far the most ubiquitous in the Western world. Pears are classified within the Rosaceae family, sometimes called the rose family, though this family is much, much more diverse than just roses. It includes almost 5,000 species, including countless fruits such as apples, apricots, and blackberries, plus trees and shrubs such as rowans and firethorns. The European pear is known scientifically as Pyrus communis. It's native to Central and Eastern Europe and Western Asia, but these days can be found across the world. Archaeological findings in Neolithic and Bronze Age sites in Europe suggest that it has fed our ancestors for millennia, long before cultivation began. The Greeks and Romans were perhaps the first to cultivate pears, and writers such as Pliny the Elder give recommendations about how to grow and graft them. It's thought that the Romans introduced it to Western Europe, where some centuries later, medieval monks would develop new varieties in their monastic orchards. Many more centuries later, it was one of the first European trees to be brought to North America by the Pilgrims. It's no secret why it has been so favored throughout history. The tree is exceptionally hardy, can adapt to a range of different climates and soil types, and yields delicious and nutritious fruit. Its wood is also highly prized for its beauty and utility. In fact, pear wood has been used in musical instruments since the Middle Ages. Everything from piano keys to guitar backs to harmonicas. These days, there are around 3,000 European pear cultivars in the world, though only about 20 to 25 are commercially traded. The Endicott pear tree is an example of the most widely grown pear cultivar in the U.S., commonly known as the Williams pear, Bartlett pear, or sometimes the Bon Chrétien pear. This latter name, which translates to good Christian, is the oldest. It refers to a holy healer called Francis of Paula, who was called to the deathbed of King Louis XI of France back in 1483. Francis brought with him a pear seed, which he offered to the king with instructions on how to plant and care for it, and the name was born. Now, I should interject here that all these wonderful characteristics that make the Bartlett pear, or the European pear, the common pear, whatever we want to call it, so very successful, have also made it something of a invasive species here in the U.S. A lot of people are no longer planting them, mainly for the reason that they do, in some cases, outcompete native species, but also because the branches can be quite brittle. And so in a snowstorm or a windstorm, they can break and lose that beautiful form that so many people planted them for to begin with. So how has the Endicott pear survived all these centuries? This single tree has witnessed massive societal changes and has weathered a fair few threats to its own life too. John Endicott planted the tree in the place originally known by the Native Americans as Nomkeek, which would later be renamed Salem. Yes, that Salem, site of the 1692 Salem witch trials. These days, the area is called Danvers, and the tree continues to be cherished by Danvers residents and visitors alike. John Endicott did not just plant this pear tree, he had requested many different seeds and cuttings from England, leading to hundreds of fruit trees around his property, which he aptly named Orchard Farm. But around 12 years after the Endicott pear was planted, a fire swept through the orchard, destroying hundreds of trees. Miraculously, the pear tree was spared. By the early 1800s, the Endicott heirs had become destitute, and the house had crumbled. Yet the tree, though already getting on in years, was still growing strong. A series of storms damaged its trunk and branches, and killed some of its neighboring trees, but appeared to not unduly affect its health. In 1806, a frequent visitor to the estate, named Reverend William Bentley, said that the tree stood without any sensible injury in the violent storm of October 1804, when some of its younger neighbors fell victim to the fury of the wind. It continues to yield many bushels, and I am every year supplied from it to satisfy my friends, who are fond of feasting on the fruit of the first settlers and of our first governor. Bentley would later send some of the tree's fruits to former President John Adams, who liked them enough to grow his own pear trees from cuttings from the Endicott pear. Fast forward a century, in 1919, the tree was still thriving and was admired by James Raymond Simmons, author of The Historic Trees of Massachusetts, who said, "It is one of the most quaint and strangely impressive of all the historic trees." In 1938, it was damaged by the infamous New England hurricane. In 1952, it became a parking lot. In 1964, a 14-year-old vandal, described by the chief of police as hard as nails, dismembered the tree completely, leaving just the stump. Not a leaf, not a twig, not a branch, not a limb was left, said the Danvers Herald. But by the following year, dozens of suckers had emerged from the rootstock. A fence was built around the emerging suckers, which soon grew up to a full-size tree once again. And the tree continues to live on today. If it weren't for the fence and signposts that accompany it, chances are that the average passerby wouldn't notice it as anything special, and would certainly never guess that it is likely the oldest fruit tree in the USA. The Endicott pear is not the only pear tree to have had a deep cultural impact. In the UK, a wild European pear tree, known as the Covington pear tree, was voted English Tree of the Year in 2015, both for its status as a beloved local landmark and its venerable age of around 250 years. Tragically, despite protests and petitions, the development of the controversial HS2 railway led to its removal. The tree was cut down in 2020, but the stump was transplanted and has since grown new shoots. So the tree lives on. Both the Endicott pear and the Covington pear demonstrate the impressive resilience of this tree. A third example comes from the U.S.'s most tragic day, 9/11. The collapse of the Twin Towers buried and burned a nearby Callery pear tree, so all presumed it dead, but the tree was rescued and replanted and has since regained full health. It now grows in the memorial ground, where it's known as the survivor tree, a symbol of hope and rebirth. So perhaps you want to help propagate the deep cultural legacy of the pear tree and grow your own? What do you need? Pear trees prefer temperate climates, but are happy with quite severe cold and short bursts. In fact, winter frosts are necessary to induce the development of flowers later in the year. If you want to grow a pear tree in your garden, choose a spot with plenty of sunlight, ventilation, and well-drained soil. Most pears are not self-fertile, so if you want fruit, which you probably do, make sure there are other pear trees nearby. For maximum fruit yields, the best approach is to plant 2 or more trees of different varieties, which cross-pollinate each other when spring comes around. This pollination is facilitated by a diverse range of insects, including butterflies, bees, and flies. This makes it a great tree to attract pollinators to your garden. The pears themselves are also enjoyed by many animals, including birds, insects such as wasps, and mammals too, if you don't get to them first. Pears tend to begin producing fruit when they're between 4 and 7 years of age, though you can find varieties that produce earlier. Typically, they'll go on to keep producing fruit for 50 to 75 years, though some, such as the Endicott pear demonstrates, can keep going much longer. The average European pear lives to about 250 years old, so it's definitely a tree for life, and the lives of several generations to follow. Pear trees also benefit from regular pruning, which helps promote fruit production, and also staves off diseases such as scab and fire blight. And remember, pears ripen off the tree, so pick them when they're still hard. Otherwise, you'll end up with mushy fruit. The fruits can last a long time in the right conditions, which has been historically important as it helps provide sustenance in the winter months. Back in the age of sailing ships, they would stock up on pears to stave off scurvy. It's perhaps for this reason that pears ended up in Detroit. If you're in the city and see an exceptionally tall type of pear tree, called a Jesuit pear, chances are that you're in a French-Canadian neighborhood. The tree was brought by Jesuit missionaries, or French settlers, back when the area was known as New France, and many descendants of those early settlers continue to live in these same communities. It's said the trees were planted in groups of 12 to represent the 12 apostles, with one at a slightly further distance to represent Judas. The Jesuit pear trees continue to be treasured today and are a time window back into the earliest days of the city. Let's close by returning briefly to the Endicott pear, which has inspired countless creatives through the years. Among them is the poet Lucy Larcom, who wrote The Governor's Tree for Arbor Day in 1890, a long poem honoring the tree. We'll end with an extract that I think still resonates strongly today. Governor Endicott little thought that when centuries had passed, bloom and fruitage still would last, still a growing, breathing thing, autumn with the heart of spring. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to nature with Plant Connection. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to tap subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.